What is the cost to own, run and operate a used Lamborghini? And in particular the Lamborghini Gallardo. Now after all, it's more than a decade old at this point, and when a car gets that old, particularly a supercar, people start to wonder, does it become a money pit? Do things start randomly breaking down? You just continually hand over more and more money to keep the car operating. Now I've owned my current Lamborghini for about 3 years now. It's a Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera 570-4, so the second gen Gallardo, or the LP Gallardo. I've owned it, like I said, for about 3 years, and I'll go over the cost for owning it for its whole life, but also over the past 12 months. Before owning this Gallardo, I owned a pre-LP Gallardo, which was actually significantly more expensive to maintain, but there were some significant differences between the quality of those two cars, which I'll also go over. And in essence, the cost to you of owning and running this car is going to depend a lot on the condition that you buy it in. If you buy a good condition car that has been well looked after, it won't be that expensive. But if you buy a bad condition car with maybe some interesting history, then it will be very expensive for you to maintain. A lot of it comes down to your purchase. So let's have a look at what's happened here. Let's start with an overview of the car, because the nature of the car will significantly influence your cost of ownership. Buy a bad car and it will cost you a lot of money. Now I've owned mine for about 3 years now. It's a Gallardo Superleggera LP 570-4, and the costs are likely to be quite similar for all of the LP Gallardos. And the cost for the LP Gallardos, at least in my experience, seem to be rather lower than for the pre-LP or older Gallardos. Now I bought mine from Perth, which is the other side of Australia from where I am. So I didn't see it in person, nor did I test drive it before buying it. However, I had a pre-purchase inspection done to see whether there were any issues, and it came up largely clean, although I was aware that a clutch might need replacement at some point. I then had it brought over to Sydney, and then I registered it, and that was basically the history. Throughout the life of ownership, nothing major has really gone wrong that was catastrophic, although I did need to replace the clutch, which of course was expensive, and I'll get to that in a bit, but has generally been quite reliable. It's never left me stranded, nothing has ever gone egregiously or catastrophically wrong that needed emergency repairs. Rather, things could be dealt with in a timely and efficient and ordered manner. It has been rather pleasant to drive, I enjoy driving it. Rather, when I had the pre-LP Gallardo, I did not enjoy driving that, but my LP Gallardo I do enjoy driving. And it will be sad to see it go when I eventually sell it, or if I eventually sell it. So how much has it cost me to own over the past 12 months? Well, not terribly much in the grand scheme of things, but of course, I probably could have actually made it cheaper. So the two major costs, and really, well, the only cost other than petrol and the like, have been I bought one tyre, because I don't track the car, so I didn't need to buy all of the tyres, although some people in the comments might be cringing about that, so I bought one tyre, which cost me 600 Australian dollars. Furthermore, I also had it serviced, and that was the only other cost. Though the service was in total about 2,700 Australian dollars, which is on the expensive side. Again, some of you in the comments might be suggesting that that's far too expensive. Well, that's really a matter for you to decide, but it was quite expensive to get that done. Now, I had that done at Lamborghini in Sydney. The main reason for doing that is I wanted in the logbook to have a Lamborghini stamp, so if I were to go to sell it, people can see full Lamborghini service history. And the other prior owner had also serviced it at Lamborghini, so I might as well just continue that on. For the sake of saving a few $100s going to an independent mechanic, it seemed better to just get the full Lamborghini service history. Now when they did this, they replaced some of the things that needed to be replacing, so O-rings and other random things. But there was nothing major that needed to be done, although all of those things, the little things and the labour, they all add up to being expensive. So that was the past 12 months. $600 tyre plus $2,700 for the service equals $3,300. Not terribly expensive in the grand scheme of things, but certainly not cheap. If you were to own the car, you could probably manage your expenses by going to an independent mechanic. That would seem to be more viable if your car hasn't been serviced by Lamborghini throughout its whole history, in which case going to the independent mechanic makes a lot of sense. And there are independent mechanics in Sydney that are really very good. For example, for a lot of the other things I needed fixed, like brake pads or the clutch, I went to European Galleria in Sydney, and they're really, really good. I would highly recommend them. But in any case, relatively inexpensive over the past 12 months. So how much does it cost overall? And again here, it hasn't been too bad when spread over the course of the 3 years. So every year I've obviously serviced the car. That's not terribly surprising. That's increased a bit over time. Now, sometimes with services, more things are done than with other services, but you're looking at 2,000 or so Australian dollars each service. But again, that will vary a little bit. And again, in the United States, you're going to need to adjust that to US dollars. Furthermore, throughout my life of ownership, I've also replaced the brake pads. That was about $1,500. I also replaced the O2 sensors because the aftermarket exhaust was creating issues, so I needed to fix those up. That was about $600 in total. The big ticket item was really the clutch, and that cost me about 10,000 Australian dollars to get that done. Now that's not the cheapest thing in the world, but you spread that throughout the course of your ownership, and you'll probably only need to do that once, maybe twice if you own it for like a decade, and it's not that bad. $10,000 spread over maybe 5 years, maybe more than that because clutches don't tend to wear out that much in the LP cars. It's actually not that awful. It's really a couple of $1,000s per year on that clutch, which when you compare that to say a used BMW or a used Mercedes or a used Porsche, it's not necessarily that bad. It sounds like it's a big ticket item that is egregious, that is awful, that is going to break the bank, but in reality, it doesn't really do that because it's not like it happens every year. And it's not like it needs to be done continually, rather it's kind of a one and done type deal. So I wasn't too concerned about that. It was expensive, but not that bad in the grand scheme of things. The question is then, how does this compare to my pre-LP Gallardo? Well, at one time I owned a 2006 Gallardo, and it was a rather unpleasant ownership experience. I did not enjoy driving it, well really at all, and things got quite expensive. Part of this comes down to the purchase of the car. When I purchased it, I had a pre-purchase inspection done, but it wasn't done by Lamborghini or really a big name mechanic that really deals with these things. So therefore the PPI wasn't as good as it should have been. Furthermore, I didn't have full service records for it, and in addition, it was imported into Australia rather than being Australian delivered from factory, which further added to the risks. I should have seen these risks compounding and decided to just not buy the car. However, unfortunately, well, I did. And then it kind of became expensive to own. I needed to fix up things throughout the life of ownership, and I was rather happy to actually be rid of it in the end. The person who bought it from me did their own pre-purchase inspection. They picked up some things that they might need to deal with, but I don't really know what the status is of the car at the moment. I do hope the current owner has a better experience with it than me. Now, personally, I would never go and buy a pre-LP Gallardo again. I didn't enjoy it at all. I didn't enjoy the cost aspect of it, although part of that is going to depend on the car itself, but I also didn't enjoy driving it. It felt jerky from a standstill. It felt like the acceleration was a little bit weird. When I had the rear-wheel drive conversion done to it, it was much better, but still, it was not the most pleasant experience to either own or to drive. What then is my verdict and what next for the car? Well, my overall ownership experience has been pleasant and relatively inexpensive. I really enjoy owning the car, and it would be a difficult one to sell. I would obviously sell it for the right price, but obviously not at a bargain basement price, because if I were to do so, I have to ask myself, what would I actually replace it with? And for the money, I'm not sure there's a better value proposition, because the Gallardo has depreciated quite a lot, but it's still a supercar, and at least in my market, it seems to be trading for less than a Ferrari F430. And I'm looking at these thinking, well, is the F430 really going to be an upgrade versus an LP Gallardo? So if I were to sell it, I need to be looking at, well, do I go into a Huracan? Or do I wait for the Huracan's replacement and then buy the replacement, or potentially buy a further depreciated Huracan? It's a tricky question, and I haven't yet decided exactly what I'm going to do. Like I've said, I would consider selling it, but not necessarily at any price. And if you've got any thoughts about the market for these, I'd be interested to hear that in the comments below. But otherwise, I hope this video has been somewhat informative to you. If it has, it would be great if you like the video and subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I see you next time as well.